Emmanuel, here they.
Salah for Corona here today.
I'm Karen Cornell.
Right, opening government.
Javier speaking first, no preference.
Antonio speaking second, no preference.
Ruth speaking first, no preference.
Webster speaking second, no preference.
Carl speaking first, no preference.
And Eric second, no preference.
Peter speaking first, no preference.
Zibusi, so male pronouns.
Okay. Well, that said, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister to open the case. Some model and some framing before starting with the claims of option. First, we want to say is that the work class could be defined as the less qualified people of the society which have not received a university study and not a higher education, and which actually are working in a lower skill works and usually amount to more than 50% of the population in most of the world. Now, what is the model here? The model is that we are going to give less taxes to the artists that do this kind of glorification in their arts. We are going to give them free buildings in order to put their exposition. We are going to subsidize these artists in order to be able to work, and we are going to give them access to university and to schools in order to make publicity of their artwork and be influential in the field. What is the framing of this debate? The framing of this debate is to understand that nowadays the work class is demonized in almost every part of the world. That means that the society thinks that first, they don't get the success, and in many individualistic countries this is something which is really a stigmatization. Secondly, that they fail to properly use the education that the state is providing them, or that they don't give enough effort to access that education when they could, that they fail in life, and that at the end of the day they are charged for the state because they are the ones which are receiving the most subsidies of the state. This is awful because this is making really difficult to go through reforms, and it's making really difficult the life of these people in order to live in the society and the way that they feel themselves. We're going to promote art which first drop the life days of these people as human beings, as the other part of the society, and secondly, and more important, to make understand the people that they are the base of the society, that the only way this country is working is because of the working class, that the working class is producing the economy, is the one which maintains this working, and because of this you are able to live with your privileges. Without this, you will not live like this. This is the drop that this glorification will do, and we have two claims that this is going to provoke. First claim, that this is going to affect the way the society sees these people in a positive way, and therefore they will lead to better reforms and better life on them. And secondly, that these people, the working class, will change the opinion that they have about themselves, because now they are auto-stigmatizing themselves. Going to the first claim, we think that for 4 reasons, there is going to be a progressive change in how the society is looking at these people. First, because we think that the pop culture, especially in the theater, which is one of the arts that we are going to use, is very strong in order to create idols and to create ways of life that you think is good. For example, when you look at this point, think about the US Marines and how the people see them. They are the most handsome people, the most strong people, and the most brave people, because Hollywood had for decades made movies out there, making sure that you think that this is an awesome world, not yet, and therefore that they are good. We're going to do the same thing for the working class, and we think that this is extremely strong because the singers, the actors, etc. are idols in our society, and they are really influential in the pop culture. Secondly, we think is that this is going to be key in order to understand how these people work. Now, the people in the society don't know how the daily life of these people are. They think that, okay, they are just lazy people which don't study enough and that are using the state to support them. If you put really how the life of these people is, we think that you are going to be able to identify common problems with them. To say they are hard workers as well. They have problems with their child. Their life is hard, and they are also producing a lot. But thirdly, and key in this debate, they are going to understand how the country is working through these movies, through these books, through this art. They are going to see how glorious is that these people is working in order to you have those privileges. You are going to see that they are essential, not yet, to the work of the state. With all these people working like this, the country is not existing. If these people stops to do what they are doing, the country cannot continue working. They are essential to work in the country, and therefore they are at some point cures for this country. And fourthly, we think that it's going to be also an stigmatization of the anti-work class people. Why? Because in these movies, in these books, it's also, they always have to be what bad guy, the bad guys which are attacking these people. So, and these people usually is hardly characterized as bad people, which is going to be therefore also a bad behavior outside the art because of the way that the people perceive the art. Now, not yet. We look to the impact which are really easy. If all these things goes, we think that, first of all, it will be easier in the long term to pass legislation in order to make these people better life, like giving them less taxes, to fight against discrimination and killing, give them the opportunity to access education really, not in bad schools, but in good schools, because the people will be conscious of the real situation of these people and how important are they for the society, and they will tie that if they are going good, the country is going good, and therefore they are going good because you are going to explain them how they are living. Now, second point is how the opinion of myself as a world-class person is going to change. We think that in the current study tool, there is many people who feel that this worse situation that they have in the comparative parts of the society is their fault. That they research this because they are lazy, because they are not smart enough, and because at the end of the day, as people, which is better, and therefore they are richer, and so on. And so we think that this is the current narrative of most of the states, that is promoted by the elite, which wants to put the work class as a bad part of the society in order to not pass legislation which can help them. We think that this is hopeful and will change in two different ways. First, because of the self-confirmation bias that we will have. So at the end of the day, we'll have this in order to change your mind and say, okay, my life is not so bad. I'm not the one which have this damage, and therefore I'm good. And I think that it is a narrative that I would like to address with. Yeah, your point.
From opening opposition, we assume that your case is incredibly coercive. We think that what you're doing is forcing individuals to have a specific conversation in society. That conversation does not happen in good faith. Show us how it happens. Oh, so we don't think that the conversation in society happens in good faith. Show us how this conversation happens in good faith.
I think that we explain how is the effect of this art in the society. We think that these are quite idols of the people in the cinema and the scenes, and they have a strong influence. We think that it will be good and that good faith will be because I understand their art. And the second reason we think that I will change the opinion about myself is that because we think that we will start to have good input from the world. I mean, the world which before think that I was lazy and I was a person which do not use good education, will at the end of the day treat me better, and therefore because of the inputs of the other people of the society, I will improve. I'm not saying, of course, in both points that this is going to be a huge change, will completely change the society, but we think that the marginal change of more people accepting them and more people of the working class understanding how is their life and why they are not a bad people, this will lead to several impacts also for these people. First, less frustration in life, which is really important in order to afford the new challenges of your life. Don't think that you are lazy, don't think that you are worthless, but think that you are one of the heroes of the nation which is maintaining the economy and which can go through many challenges. And also, in order to have the internal peace of don't feel like the shit of the country, the person which failed, the person which is not success, and therefore to have empathy of the other person of the people. We think because of the society is changing slowly, but it's changing, and because of the self-perception of these people, we're very proud to propose this motion.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister. Call upon the Leader of Opposition.
There's a mischaracterization of the working class and the perception of society about the working class from opening government. They tell you that the working class is demonized currently in society, right? And we tell you that this is incorrect. We tell you that, in fact, the working class has sympathy from the society because everyone is aware of the unfair conditions under which they work, of the exploitation that they experience, and of the lack of rewarding that is fair to them. We think that when they shift the narrative, therefore, and they begin to glorify the working class, they shift the narrative away from these incorrect things that are happening, such as their exploitation, such as the lack of fair reward systems that is happening in place, and therefore it means that the working class will be worse off than it is under status quo. We think that, therefore, we cannot propose this motion. The one thing that we think we can agree with, the concession that we can make to their characterization of the working class is of them being vulnerable. They tell you that the working class is unskilled, is people that who do manual labor, is people that who are the backbone of the economy. We agree to this. However, we think that these people will be at a position of being more harmed, of being exploited, when the only narrative that is driven, or the only narrative that is painted about them, is about them being the backbone of the economy, and making them think that they're doing something right, and making them think that the conditions under which they are working are correct, and therefore they should just soldier on because, hey, the economy relies on them. We don't think that this is something we agree with. Therefore, what are the questions that we will ask as opening opposition particularly that will tell you why it is okay to oppose this motion? Firstly, what is the role of art in society? The role of art in society is to facilitate certain conversations. The role of art is to promote a multiplicity of narratives about things that the society experiences. In cases such as when the French Revolution was happening, for instance, there wasn't a singular narrative where everyone was just demonizing or promoting the French Revolution. There were multiple narratives that were happening. This is what we promote. We think that at a point where art facilitates political conversations, but there is a certain body that monopolizes that particular conversation, this becomes problematic. We tell you that art as a form of expression is something that should facilitate political conversations and a multiplicity of narratives in that conversation, not a singular a picture saying that, hey, the working class is the backbone of the economy and that's all there is to it. We think that what we want is for all sides of the experiences of the working class to be depicted so that the conversation can be fruitful and so that the conversation can result in tangible benefits. At a point where we only glorify this sort of depiction, then we cannot even get to any tangible change because there is only one narrative that is painted. Secondly, we want to look at the role of art as a subjective expression. When the reason why artists value art and the reason why artists become important in society is because they depict narratives in a way that they see it. It's a subjective experience. At a point where you take the autonomy and you take the self-determination and the ability of the artist to express themselves, we think that you are exploiting the artist's vulnerability. Currently, we tell you that art is something that is very inaccessible, right? When you buy a painting of Picasso's painting, it's very expensive. It's something that can be only accessed by the higher class. At a point where artists are all fighting to get into a particular space, are all fighting to get a piece of the pie, and you tell them, hey, if you depict this type of a story, we'll pay you university fees. If you depict this type of a story, we will get you a house in Cape Town, right? We think that you are exploiting the vulnerability of the artist. You are taking away their self-determination. You are taking away their ability to tell experiences from their own lens, and you are therefore shifting the narrative, making it something that is harmful to the society and to the artists. Secondly, we tell you who is most likely to want to subsidize these artists, right? We tell you it can either be the government or it can be capitalist companies that want to exploit the working class. Therefore, the motive of these actors who would want to subsidize these types of art is also very questionable, because what they want to do is to keep people in the working class. They want to tell people in the working class, they want to tell miners in Johannesburg that, hey, you are doing the best for this economy. Don't leave here. Don't go get a university degree. Don't leave here because this is because the economy relies on you. We tell you, therefore, that you are creating a reward system that keeps people in shitty jobs because, hey, they can get the gratification of seeing themselves on a billboard and think this is the highest form of achievement they can get. You are exploiting the unskilled people, you are exploiting the uneducated people and making them and taking advantage of their positionality and therefore not allowing them to go up and not allowing them to access upward mobility in society. Also, we tell you, why is the narrative of the working class in and of itself regrettable? We tell you that in capitalistic societies, profit in and of itself is violent. When someone makes a profit, they make a profit because they've underpaid someone, because they've paid less for a certain resource, right? Because they've robbed off someone their full pay. Therefore, we tell you that the narrative of the working class in and of itself is something that's regrettable because it's based on capitalistic principles which thrive on inequality, which thrive on exploitation, and which thrive on unfairness. Therefore, if this is the only narrative that we're going to drive in society, we see a sort of like an opening of the inequality gap. We see a promotion of people getting like messed up jobs and being exploited and all of that. Therefore, we don't think that this is something that we can promote. Yeah.
The glorification of the working class does not consist on saying that their life is awesome, but rather to say that they have really hard lives because we are using them in order to the country works. That means that they are feeling that they are not have good lives, as you say, but rather that they have bad conditions and they want to improve.
I think we have a very different understanding of what glorifying is. If
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
glorifying something, you're making it seem good. You're making it seem, you're painting a good picture about it, and you're not showing the people the correct and accurate narrative of what the thing really is. If you're glorifying something, you're saying that, hey, this is great, this is good, you're in a billboard, you are the spine of the economy, and we think you are rewarded, you must stay there, right? So we don't understand why they're saying that people will feel, will see their lives for what they really are, right? That doesn't exist. Also, we tell you that if they are trying to, if they had said they are trying to subsidize this art because they want to facilitate a conversation, this conversation would happen in a very limited scope anyways, because as I told you, art is inaccessible. Only a few people appreciate art, can afford very expensive art, which means that the conversation about the exploitation of people in the working class would happen in a very concentrated place and would not overspill to the rest of society, which is where we want the conversation to be happening anyways. So what do we tell you uniquely as opening opposition that wins us this debate, right? We tell you that the role of art in society is very important, such that the narratives that happen must be plural, must not be tainted by skewed benefits that people will get from monopolizing that space. We tell you that art is a subjective experience and that we value the agency of an artist. We tell you that people who would want to subsidize this art anyways would be governments who are selfish, would be corporate who want to continue exploiting the working class and making them feel that they are contributing to the economy. And we tell you that the narrative of the working class in and of itself is regrettable, which is therefore something we cannot support. Therefore, if you are for the emancipation of the working class and for them seeing their exploitation for what it really is, and for facilitating meaningful conversation in society, you'll side with both.
Thank you for the opposition, and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Probably the most important point of all is that this narrative will promote them to stay in the same place because they'll think that they're good, because this glorification implies that they're good in this position. This is a mischaracterization of what glorification means. Let me give you a case example. If I glorify a kid in Africa who's dying out of not having food, I'm glorifying him because I think he's a hero. If I glorify a soldier in wherever place in Afghanistan, I glorify because I think he's doing something worth it. Not because the conditions were great, or the conditions when he's starting are great, but rather because I think that person is intrinsically good and his conditions are not, and he's fighting against them. It is not true to say that glorifying the class is just saying you're good. It's saying you're worthy in and of itself, not your condition, but you value as a person. The implication of this rebuttal implies that every impact attached in all those cases to the fact that they will think that they're bad is just false in this debate. This is not the narrative we are promoting. It's just saying, look, you are worthy in and of itself, regardless of the situation in which you are, regardless of the education you have. Your conditions not good, but you are as a person. That's the first rebuttal. Rebuttals to direct arguments in our role. The first thing they say is the role of art is to promote variety and to facilitate all kinds of conversations. I don't know why it is true. It's just an assertion. I don't believe it. And even if it's true, I don't care at all. I think it is good to put another kind of conversation, then we enact this policy, and then we do it. The second thing they say is, look, you take the autonomy of the artist to promote whatever art they want. Two rebuttals here. First, no. It's just funding some artists who by free choice they'll elect to do this type of art. We promote them because we think they're good, and hence we promote them. This is not true that this pulls out everyone in the market, because they still can produce every art they're still attached. Even if we lose some artists who take the decision to go to this other form of production because they think this is more worthy, we're happy with that, because we think there's no intrinsic value of having some people producing X art rather than producing art that will have utility to society. Third thing they claim is that this happens in a limited scope, and this is unimpactful. Two claims. A, it's false. Even if not many people go to the Louvre Museum. Yes, they go to cinemas. Yes, they read books. Many people see books in cinemas as a form of art. It is a form of art. And this is precisely a unique way to access to those. Many people will access. But even if it's not like very impactful, we think that we will produce some changes in society. We're not to aim the complete change in society, rather a change that promotes and permit people to enable policies that are good. So that's our role in the debate. The only rebuttal they bring to our case is the following. They say that they are already not demonized, so won't have an impact. Two rebuttals here. First, yes, they are demonized in many countries in the world, not because of a fact assertion that we claim, but rather because people in the top have incentives to demonize them. They have incentives not to pass policies which are good to them, because they perceive those policies to be intrinsically bad for those people in the top. So yes, they're discriminated because of a fact of perceiving them as the way to maintain in top. But secondly, even if they were not as demonized, it is not condition sine qua non for our case. Our case perfectly works, if not as discriminated as we say. It works because it improves their condition even more in the societies in which they live. Note that OO didn't bring any rebuttal to any of Javi's analysis, but let's enlarge the case in a significant way. First thing Javi told you is that this will change the perception of the working class in society. Look, this is a unique policy to achieve this. It's a prerequisite to enact policies in society. Why is this the case? Look, it is not true to say that it's rich people or people in the top are bad per se, or that are per se against policies toward working class. They normally are, but it's not a per se condition. It's rather different. It's because they perceive themselves as be combating those people, as to be like binary decisions. Either we defend the rich or we defend the poor. And the way they defend themselves is because they think they're most important, like the working class. This is because, A, they think that they need to protect themselves, but B, because most of the times, the things that they claim, like give them like a minimum wage or whatever, are claimed by politicians. Politicians tell them, look, we need to go for these people, we need to defend them. The problem is that they're against those politicians. That is a consequence, that is a prerequisite in order to enact those policies. It is a prerequisite because when you change the perception and you tell them, look, it is not true that they are unworthy for society. Rather, it is true that they are necessary to you. If you want to maintain your position, it is also true that those people are so necessary. Making those people to change that mentality is the prerequisite for enabling the most important reforms to them. This is uniquely impactful to the debate compared to any other harm that OO or CO will ever claim. We think that this wins the debate in and of itself enough. CO, your extension, please. No? Great. Second argument we bring is that this will change the perception of the people in and of itself. Even if we lost all of other claims in the debate, we're going to win this debate out of the claim that this will change the way that people in and of themselves perceive themselves. Society, since they grow, like since they're little, they tell those people you're not worthy. You won't be able to go up. You didn't went to school. Your parents aren't enabling you to have the best education. They don't permit you to go up. What this policy makes them feel is that that narrative that previously was enacted in those brains, it is not true. That they are not bad just because of the fact they weren't able to do some things that others were. What this provokes is many things in them. First, they will perceive that their growth as persons wasn't prerequisite on the conditions, i.e. their parents giving things net or not. Just by luck they arrived there, but that luck does not determine their future and does not determine their worth as persons. They have normalized that they weren't the same as others. They've normalized in their lives, due to this characterization of society, that they were different. These narratives will keep this high burden on them. This burden will be quit just because of seeing them. This culture is especially important in those people. They are the most who access those cinemas. They are the most to believe those things. They are the most to believe the non-rational things becoming of those films. Hence, it is most likely in this kind of group to believe those persons that they're normal, that they're good, they're intrinsically positive, and that they can achieve things. Even if we lost any other impact in the debate, winning this implies that we enable people who have been discriminated and have been feeling a shit for many times to feel a little bit better. That impact will enable us to win the debate compared to harming art or whatsoever COO will bring in this debate. Thank you very much.
I fairly like being in top room debates because we just think that we're good. We don't think that by actively ignoring individuals in debates and just reducing cases, you actively deal with those cases. We think that they needed to be a little bit more charitable to Ruth's case and listen. We think that a few areas of contention in this debate was, I'm going to kill them with their criteria because one, they tell you that they want to do this by creating less taxes for artists, firstly. Secondly, creating access to university, but thirdly, accessing free buildings. Because so in essence, they want to create an inclusionary space. If I tell you that this inclusionary space cannot exist because one, the conversation is likely to not happen in the way that they want to facilitate that conversation, but secondly, the access is likely to harm that specific expression and subjective expression of that artist, we think that they lose the debate. But thirdly, here, we think that it is likely to be controlled by more powerful narratives that come from their side. And fourthly and lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that all of the above is conditional. Because when you do enter into a specific space, we think that when they do say that you need to go to school for artistry, or you're going to have less taxes and get a free building, it's conditional on you depicting a specific conversation. It's conditional on you depicting a specific people. It's conditional on you depicting a specific harm, and a harm that glorifies the working class. We think that that's extremely and extraneously harmful on that side of the debate. Why do we tell you that identity is much more important? Because we think that this experience is largely ignored here. They don't tell you what this working class individual looks like, right? We tell you that these individuals are individuals that are that have been shaped by their surroundings, shaped by their identity. We think that this is important because it happens because of a particular experience. When you glorify that experience, ladies and gentlemen, what you do is you commodify that individual's experience, you commodify that individual's pain. Ruth has told you that extensively. He doesn't deal with that in his speech. Because when you commodify an individual's speech, ladies and gentlemen, he's unlikely to feel worthy, because he's unlikely to then feel worthy when his experience is placed on a billboard. We think that they needed to do extensive amounts of analysis to show us how that doesn't happen. But we think that here, more often than not, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that informs art. But we think that when it is a specific conversation that only glorifies art, or glorifies the working class, ladies and gentlemen, we think that it is harmful. What am I going to do in this speech? I'm going to give you strategic importance of a few things. We tell you that one, access to education harms an individual's artistic expression, because institutions do not want your subjective understanding of what art is. They want to frame your ability to paint, your ability to create poetry, your ability to create music. We think that those are things that we're speaking about within today's debate. At the end of your 3-year degree, you are unlikely to be the same artist that you are when you started, because those whitewashed institutions framed you in a way that would portray the art in a way that they want you to portray that art. Secondary to this, ladies and gentlemen, we think that this is largely exploitative of that individual's art, because this means that individuals can then only access those institutions at the point where they want to express their art in this way. We think that art is very art is something that is something that it's protesting. We think that when art is protesting, it needs to be subjective. We believe in a world where art is something that works against structural inequalities, that works against institutions. We think that the only way, if they want to create inclusive spaces, ladies and gentlemen, we think that it's much more harmful to create inclusive spaces here. Second to this, ladies and gentlemen, give you the audacity to perform. We think that here, if Ruth tells you that the you are worthy conversation just can't work, because we don't think that this happens. One, art is exploitative and objectifying, firstly. Secondly, it doesn't facilitate a conversation at a point where you skew the conversation to what you want it to be, because people are likely to opt out of that conversation. Thirdly, here, we think that it's likely to exclude these individuals because artistic spaces are already exclusive of individuals in the working class. We think that that's why it is specifically objectifying. Here, what I tell you in this speech specifically, I tell you that the stigmatization, what he tells you in a moment, we tell you that how these people work, ladies and gentlemen, because it's essential to see how opening government leaves out the characterization of how these people actually work. What this looks like, ladies and gentlemen, and it's stigmatizing under their side. What this looks like is people working in the mines. It's people people working in the plantation areas. We think that that is explicitly stigmatizing to those individuals, because there's no way that individuals can feel worthy from the depiction of that specific art. That conversation just doesn't happen quickly.
What?
Not you.
But today, already media and art portrays working class, but they do it in a very demonizing manner. Why is the comparative of demonization on your side much better than glorifying? Because that also commodifies, but in a much worse light.
That's an unfair burden to place on me. You need to prove that, because we tell you that the media already works in this. We're using the media and the media's analysis on our side, because it's the same way. When you depict people and you glorify individuals in a specific way, and you use whitewashed narratives or whitewashed institutions to do that, but moreover give people conditions, so you're exploiting individual vulnerability, like saying, hey, you can't access this space. If you're able to glorify the working class and you're able to do this for us, we would give you education, we would give you less taxes. Guess what? Individuals are far more likely to still express themselves much better on our side, ladies and gentlemen. Comparatively, we win that. We think that CG's extension is out. What we tell you here, ladies and gentlemen, is these are individuals that speak to a specific identity. This is an identity violation. We think that firstly, because this harms how a person identifies, because it is unlikely for that individual to have a specific say about how that art is portrayed, or how the artist specifically wants to portray that art. Secondary to this, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't deal with the problem, because if you want to include individuals into spaces, or if you want to create more inclusion, you don't do it by showing how people are poor. You actively go and make sure that you close the gap between the rich and the poor. You don't do that. We don't think that it facilitates that conversation. But even if it does facilitate that conversation, ladies and gentlemen, we think that that conversation is likely to be of a demonizing nature. Opening government does not give you a good characterization of what these working class people look like. They look like individuals that work in the mine. We don't think that they are likely to get out of the mine at the point where they show them to white people in Clifton Beach on a painting. We think that what you do, ladies and gentlemen, is you exclude individuals, but you are likely to have people perform on their behalf. I am very proud to stand with opening opposition.
Hip-hop has been the greatest culture win for the black working class, especially in the United States of America. It used to be suppressed for decades by the middle class, by the elite. It was used to demonize that community. We think if hip-hop, for example, would have been subsidized, we would have gotten to a point where we are today faster, and these people would be better off. Opening government gives you the potential benefits which we agree to. What we are exclusively going to give you is firstly the necessity to go through with this policy, and secondly why the state has an irrefutable responsibility to subsidize art that glorifies the working class. I'm going to have 3 points in my speech. Firstly, what is the inherent function of art? Secondly, what's the duty of the state? And thirdly, how do we increase accessibility to art with this policy? Before that, some rebuttal to opening opposition. Firstly, what it tells us that society already sympathizes with the working class. Firstly, we don't think it's true. We don't think their case, we think their case actually contradicts that, right? They say how people really don't care about the working class in their speeches, and we think this is true. People choose to throw the working class under the bus in their day-to-day lives, right? They go to H&M, they buy a shirt, and they don't really think about the person who sold that shirt to them, right? And they're not obviously represented in art. Look at all the TV shows, for example. Look at Suits. These are rich lawyers, not working class people. But secondly, even if they're right, and even if the society currently already sympathizes with the working class, that working class has no say in the narrative that is created, right? Because they don't have access to that art. The people who are creating art that might sympathize are rich people, right? But thirdly, we think sympathy is never glorifying, right? It's just pity. It isn't gratitude for these people. So we think they're wrong on that front. But secondly, they make an argument that we are going to take away agency from artists, right? We think this policy does two things. Firstly, it increases working class artists' ability to create art, because creating art is going to become more cheaper, which means you have more options in terms of what you can do. It changes the way you can display your art, so it means more people can see your art, right? So we can't see how you're taking away agency. But even if we take their best case, then under the status quo, creating art is too expensive. It depends on cooperation with expensive and fancy galleries, for example. So you still don't have agency. You still have to conform to some sort of a norm. The norm under their side is so much worse because people simply care less about glorifying the working class, so it's less likely you can create the art you want to. No, thank you. Finally, they tell us that the working class narrative is inherently harmful. We think, as I mentioned, the comparative is that the working class has less say in what that narrative becomes, right? So there's no change on that part. But secondly, we don't think that glorification means that you have to unconditionally praise some sort of a group in the society. We glorify the suffering of soldiers. We don't glorify the fact that they have killed people. We don't glorify war in itself. So again, totally different issues. No, thank you. My material. Firstly, what's the function of art? We think that art and culture in general, and especially in today's world, they are essentially basic needs. What this means is that without it, it is significantly more difficult to pursue your goals in your life. It's more difficult to gain overall acceptance in the society. It's so much harder to move in the socio-economic hierarchy if you don't have access to culture, if other people think you don't have access to culture, or that you are incapable of producing culture. We think an example of this would be that if you never go to a theater, for example, then you can never engage in a meaningful conversation or discussion about that sort of art, right? With people who go to theater every week, for example. And this severely influences you, right? You are going to be seen as a less advanced person. You are seen with a person who has inherently different interests. These people from the working class, they never go to theater because they don't care about that sort of art. They are inherently different. That's the message it spreads. And we think art is incredibly important for people. It affects how you perceive the world, right? Because your lived experiences are rather limited. You can't experience every interaction there is in the world. So therefore art, for example, going to the theater, going to the cinema, going to the gallery, watching a TV show, these are the things that influence your perception of the world. Secondly, it changes how you perceive yourself, because if you never see people like you on the TV being successful, being glorified, that deeply influences the way you perceive yourself. You see yourself as weaker. Finally, it influences how other people perceive you, right? We see the rich lawyers, for example, in suits. We never see working class people being glorified. And we think this sort of situation is very analogous to education, right? And we think that therefore the state has an extremely vital role in order to rectify these sorts of imbalances. Because currently, less people from the working class can create art, less people from the working class can consume art, and this means less people in the working class can relate to art. So what's the duty of the state? We think one of its primary goals is to rectify these sorts of inherent imbalances. So the birth lottery, right? The state should try to rectify the differences in the wealth of other people's parents, physical inabilities, discriminatory stereotypes. We think the role of the state is to fight against all of these things. No, thank you. And we think that therefore also the duty of the state is to rectify the inherent imbalance in art, both in terms of access and in terms of content. And we think art is inherently elitist, and that's the situation where the state has to step in. If you look at the people who fund the creation of art and therefore influence what art talks about, these people are filthy rich. They're never from the working class, because working class people never had that kind of money. Before I move on, closing.
Do you think that the state at the moment is on the side of the working class?
No. And therefore, we propose this policy. So again, people who fund art, they are extremely rich. People who can afford to create art, display art, they are extremely rich. People who can afford to consume art, they don't tend to be from the working class. People who get the authority to interpret and critique art, they're not from the working class. And society values consumerism. So it means it values wealth, which means it's less likely that the working class narratives get to the TV. All of these things depend on the fact that you have money and social capital, right? And we think that that's the moment state needs to balance the situation. If it tries to do that, we think a few things will happen. Firstly, the variety of art is going to change. There's going to be more working class artists because it's going to be cheaper for them to produce produce their art. So it's more likely that working class people are going to find art that speaks to them, more likely they're going to consume that, more likely they're going to go to theatre, talk to these more wealthy people. It's less likely that wealthy people think that working class people aren't inherently interested in art. More likely there's going to be more discourse and it's easier to relate to these kinds of people. This affects your employment opportunities, for example, and the general narrative that people think of you. For all these reasons, please vote.
The ultimate weapon of the oppressors are the minds of the oppressed themselves. And we believe that state control of the working class narrative will ultimately undermine the real working class by stealing their own voices and using it against them, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to provide some in-depth rebuttal and further analysis of things that have happened in this debate at this stage. And then I'm going to extend upon our opening opposition by talking about how this narrative of the glorification of the working class actually divides and mischaracterizes the working class. And then finally about, why it's actually not necessarily going to be effective in the way that government really proposes it. So the first thing that I need to address is what does it mean by, is the working class glorified? Because that's been a bit of a contentious issue at this point in this debate. And here's why I want to provide a bit of further nuance in terms of what this means and what's actually happening at the moment. What we see at the moment is glorification by all governments and states and so on of what they call to be the working class. This is where we disagree with both sides of the opening a little bit, because we feel that there is no government on earth that actively propagates a narrative of the working class are evil or they're poor or they're lazy or these kinds of things. All the governments, from Donald Trump to the British or whatever, say we are for the workers. But the thing is that their definition and characterization of what the working class is excludes the poor, the marginalized, the immigrants, the refugees, the temporary workers, and basically if you look at Trump, everyone who isn't a white man with a full-time job in a steel factory. And we feel that this is very problematic, especially if you want to give more control of, from the state on how this narrative is portrayed, right? So, coming then to some independent points of rebuttal on what government said. I'm going to focus mostly on CG because I think the rest clashes with OG very nicely, and I'll leave anything else to Z, right? Now, I found it very interesting the examples used by CG, talking firstly about hip-hop. I feel that this is a really, really, really bad example because on the one hand, the commodification and popular middle-class glorification of hip-hop is currently a really big problem because the people from whom hip-hop came have been disenfranchised from the labors of their own work in that sense. It's been appropriated, and then secondly, even if you look at hip-hop, the kind of hip-hop that has become culturally popular is exactly the kind of hip-hop which doesn't criticize the status quo, which was the original purpose of hip-hop. It's been killed by glorifying it, by the middle class, right? And then secondly, the glorification of the military. This is exactly the kind of narrative that we want to avoid because the glorification of the military and people in the military has created a situation, especially in, say, America, where it has become impossible to criticize the justness of wars without criticizing the human sacrifice of the soldiers on the ground. And we feel that this is the same thing that's happening to the working class, making it very difficult to actually address these kinds of issues. And then finally, the POI that I asked about whether the government is for or against the working class at the moment. And then they said, oh no, the government is opposed to the working class, or doesn't support the working class, but yet they expect the government to glorify the situation in which the working class is at the moment. Now, this doesn't make sense because either then the government's going to try to portray themselves on the side of the working class, which is not the case, or the government's literally going to shoot itself in the foot by glorifying the victims of its own systems of oppression, which undermines itself, and that simply doesn't make sense, right? Good. Opening.
Yes. Let's take you at your best and accept, which we don't, that the characterization of working class won't be 100% perfect. It just be 50%. That it is still worthy because the comparative is to still be demonized by the society, not by the government.
I couldn't entirely hear, but I think that even if it's just 50, even if it's not completely accurate, even if it's 50% accurate, it's still going to divide the working class against itself, which is the whole problem of my main argument, right? But the first argument that I can make is a question of efficacy, right? Where we challenge the efficacy principle brought by government at all, and we feel that this is on the nature of art, right? Art is usually a function of change, of societal views, and especially in terms of the working class, in terms of social issues, it's something that goes against the status quo, something that goes against whatever the systems are at the moment, and people perceive it as that, right? People look differently at art than they do at government propaganda. And by subsidizing art in this way, by subsidizing a specific kind of art, people are going to know that. I mean, there's a world of difference between when I see something, I know the company this thing is promoted actually paid for that thing to happen, or that thing to be portrayed, than me seeing this and thinking and knowing that this is an authentic expression of, or opinion of a person portraying this thing. And we feel that ultimately the suspicion is going to undermine how people perceive this art in the first place. Because why would I buy into a narrative that's brought to me by the government in this sense? And we feel that, that's going to be problematic. But even disregarding that, even if, as the government says, things are going to happen in this way and people are going to buy into this narrative, buy into this art, we see this as very problematic. And this is something we actually see in the status quo about the working class and about narratives of the working class, and how the working class narrative has been misconstrued and hijacked and used against the working class. And this is a big, big problem. We see this with Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, for example, says that he's all for the working class, but he then places the working class against the perceived non-working class, which would be, in Donald Trump's case, Mexican immigrants. And we feel that that's a very unfair divide, because we feel in the normal idea of what the working class is, the people in society that we really want to protect is included in this. And so in mischaracterizing, according to the state, what the working class is, what we see is the case, we then turn them, and they want something to blame for their circumstances, because the state tells you, oh no, you're glorious, you're great, so obviously your poorness, and we're on your side, so obviously your problems have to come from somewhere else. And this is what we see in the status quo. The state then says, oh no, it's immigrants and so forth coming in and taking working class jobs. This is a very familiar kind of narrative. We see it in England, France, and all over the world, even in South Africa. And in doing so, we actually divide the working class, which are both in truth oppressed or turned against by the state, as admitted by side government, and having them blaming themselves or blaming other parties within themselves instead of actually addressing the real issues. And this is very problematic. And finally, it turns the individual against himself. Because when the working class is glorified, and I'm not in a glorious position, am I part of the working class? What am I doing wrong? The problem is with me, because I've been disenfranchised from my glorious group identity. And we feel that ultimately, this is going to enslave the minds of the oppressed, of the working class, against themselves. And that's why we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Notice that our extension wasn't just that such type of art would be beneficial, but rather that state has an explicit duty to balance the playing field that today is skewed towards elites. And that is something that all debates accepted. Nowhere in the last speech we heard any type of rebuttal or any type of answer to our extension. Therefore, I think closing opposition is already out. So in this speech, three things. Firstly, why closing opposition talks nonsense. Secondly, why opening opposition doesn't compare at any point the argumentation against what would be presumably a reasonable comparative. And lastly, what is the state duty here and why that trumps all other arguments within this round. So firstly, closing opposition. And their first point is that we agree that states are against the working class. Yes, but in this debate, we are the government. We don't have to agree with the Donald Trump definition of working class, but rather we might have a reasonable one. And secondly, the fact that states today don't understand what the working class is doesn't mean the art created would be reflective of that state. The Minister of Culture doesn't have to paint the painting itself, but rather give money to artists who make this make this art. They never give you a reason why the artist who is subsidized by that government doesn't anyhow know who the working class is. Presumably that artist would be from the working class themselves because they're most likely to create art on that subject. And the other point they have is that people we know that this is government propaganda. Notice it doesn't answer already claim made by our side that most of the art today is already subsidized by government. Most theaters are unprofitable and therefore need government subsidies. People don't really care about that. But secondly, the way how you engage with art doesn't really, you don't know who's funding it in most cases. Art doesn't come with the big big screen at the front of the TV show. This is brought to you by Ugandan government, but rather you just see the TV show and you don't know who funds it. Like at the moment, you don't know who is behind most of TV shows, who are the financiers behind that. So we don't think people will understand. So what is opening opposition? Notice the biggest problem with opening opposition is they give you reasons why, like commodifying working class in TV shows, for example, might be bad, but they never tell you why this doesn't happen today. Our claim is today TV shows, movies, art is skewed towards the elites. They are funded by elites, they're made by elites, they're critiqued by elites, and the audience is rather middle class or elites. That means it is skewed towards the interests of elites, they also demonize working class, and so on. So if they're opening opposition, biggest claim is we need to have a balanced conversation within art. Then today our claim is this conversation today is not balanced, and government has a duty to step in and balance the playing field. Secondly, they say we exploit artists, but again, like if the exploitation is that you have to get money from the state, then they already, at the moment they get money from white-collar elites, right? You also are exploited by the funding, no matter if it's you're skewed towards the working class or towards the white collar. Our claim is being skewed towards working class is better. They say profit is violent, yes, but this happens under both sides of the house. People in working class are still exploited. We think it's better to see show that exploitation as their sacrifice is glorified rather than their sacrifice is somehow demonized and these people are lazy and bad. Everything opening government or they tell you open opposition never really had an never really had a rebuttal to that. And the last thing we still have from opening opposition is that like the institutions and everything that makes art commodified, it makes your art whitewashed and so on. But notice our policy isn't that everybody has to go to art school now, but rather we provide access to these people. If that person thinks their art is going to get worse once they go to that school, they don't have to go to that school. Obviously, it's still the choice of the artist, not that anyhow everybody has to go. So I think opening opposition is also often this debate. But my last point also deals with them mostly. Because notice our claim is, as for the reason outlined before, because the funding, the makers, the audience, and the critique, today art is massively skewed towards the elites. They're skewed towards the white collar. You think about Mad Men or Suits or any other TV show, they're mostly about how very rich people live, not how poor people live. And we think because culture and art is a very basic need of individuals, state needs to provide it for everybody. Why is art the basic need? Because it firstly it's just like education. It's a way how you can understand society, and it's a way how society understands you. Because as Carl told you, our lived experiences are rather limited. I don't know what everything happens in the world, but I can get this knowledge using art as a medium. If that art is never accessible to me because it's too expensive, or the meaning is something I can't relate to, I can't get that. And we already fund art in that way. We fund theaters and we fund education to provide that equality. And art is a very meaningful meaningful part of people's social lives. How you can talk about theater means what types of friends you have. How you're generally perceived in society comes from the fact, are you a cultured person or are you an uncultured person? We say today working class are inherently put off from these classes, and that is bad. Opening.
Right. The example you make about suits is very problematic because under status quo, no media company is told by the government which type of art to portray. So why is it beneficial for the government to control the narrative about the working class?
The point is, by these systemic reasons we have outlined, today art is skewed towards working class, towards white collar class and elites. Our claim is state needs to step in and rectify and balance out the playing field, because today being skewed towards white collar massively harms the working class. Because the working class today doesn't have accessibility to that art by two means. Firstly, because if you see like Suits or Mad Men, you don't relate to lawyers or ad men, but because you don't have these similar lived experiences. Today, working class can't access art because there are no narratives within art that they can relate to. If there are more working class glorifying art, they can access through meaning. But second, they can also get more access through monetary means. There is going to be more art that talks about working class, therefore is cheaper. But secondly, just by the fact because it's subsidized means you have to pay less for it. It's more likely that you can go to the theater. And as we have told you, state has a duty to provide the basic need of culture in a way how you can understand society and the way how society will understand you, because state has a duty to rectify inequality by things that you have never chosen. You have never chosen to become part of working class, and because of that culture today, society sees you as a bad person, as a lazy person, and you can't understand society because you don't have access to art. State has a duty here, and is more important than any other kind of practical claim made in this debate. We're very, very, very proud to stand in our position.
And call on the opposition to
So a couple of days ago at breakfast, I had a chat with one of the ladies who serves us breakfast by Grusha. She asked me what we're doing here. I told her all the good things about debate, the things that we tell people when we want sponsorships. We talk about societal issues, we really want to change the world. That lady said, my son, tomorrow raise it up with them. That they're giving us peanuts and that they're forcing us, and that they don't usually compensate us for things like overtime. With a salary of 8,000 rand, I can't take my kids to school, I can't plan for their future, I can't be here all of the time, and I can't do so many things, raise it up with them. I was really touched because there isn't really any effect that we do besides just getting points for the tab. But what the picture that I'm painting to you today is putting a huge poster in front of Grusha that says, these women do a lot of good things for us, literally does nothing for that specific woman. That's the problem that we have as the opposition bench today, and that is something that the government bench hasn't engaged in. The government bench simply wants more airtime, particularly closing. But what they don't understand is that firstly, when you want to glorify something, you're focusing on the wrong issue in the beginning. We tell you that the airtime that you guys propose you want to give, it's okay, but at least focus on the things that actually serve to dismantle the inequalities that these people exist under, instead of glorifying them in the state that they are under the status quo. This is something that we really don't like, particularly as closing opposition, right? So what do we get from opening government? Firstly, they get us that you tell people that with this art, you tell people that the privileges that they enjoy is because of the working class, so the working class is good. What you specifically do is, the people who consume this kind of art, the fancy paintings, are the people who are the masters of the working class. So when you tell these particular people that the privileges that you enjoy are because of the working class, you don't incentivize those people to change the state of the working class. Because these things are a zero-sum game, right? It's a give and take. For the working class to rise, the boss of the working class has to give a little more. So you tell them that their privilege is dependent on the working class. You incentivize them even more to keep the working class at the state in which they are in. And this goes against your counter-characterization, like your characterized in the beginning, when you tell us that the working class are people who are generally poor. So if these people are people who are generally poor, then you have to do more to raise their standard of living. You don't do that. The second kind of point that they give us is that the self-perception of these individuals becomes better. This clashes directly with what Pierre has been telling you about how these people view themselves. Firstly, we don't agree with your point because you want us to think that self-perception actually comes from entirely how different people view you. It also comes from how you view yourself with respect to the situations you're in. That's why we have people whom we view as having nice lives going to commit suicide because the way they view themselves isn't sufficient because of the situation that they're in. So what you do, specifically to what Pierre talks to you about how those people question themselves, is that when you tell me that I'm a hero, and you tell me that I'm doing so much better for the society, the way in which I understand a hero is someone who does good and is someone who usually wins, right? So when I'm failing at my struggle as a working class person who can't afford to send my kids to school, and you're telling me that I'm a hero, you create an internal dilemma within me where I question myself so much. If I am a hero, why am I failing? Then whatever is wrong is not wrong with the system, but is wrong with me as a person. You worsen the working class on that, right? We don't like that, right? We think that people actually interact very differently with like sympathy and glorification, right? We think that when you glorify something, you're telling those people, be this is good, and this shouldn't change. Instead, what you should be doing is investing all these arguments in a more sympathetic approach that will allow people to actually be invested in changing the system for those people. Done with OG, let's move to CG. Firstly, those in government tell us that in this, I don't really get the gist of the extension, maybe because like they could be close to none, but nonetheless, let's just take them at their best. Firstly, they tell us in the status quo, the working class doesn't control the narrative of how they are viewed. Firstly, we think that that is a lie, blatant lie. These people control their narrative because they talk about this at homes. This is a conversation that we have in the marketplace. We know how they're struggling. That's why you're able to characterize them as poor, because they've told you that they're poor, they've controlled that narrative. So what you do is, when you take this control and give it to someone else as the government, or you give it to artists who are incentivized to think and produce content in a certain way, you steal that narrative from those people, which is harmful. But even if we take you at your best, right, and say that these people don't even control that narrative, you still don't give us a mechanistic analysis of how suddenly they get control of this narrative, because this narrative is given at the hands of artists who are told not to represent maybe the particular struggles, but to say, hey, these people are good and their struggles are good, whatever. But then let's take you closing.
But status quo is that rich people today glorify their own situation that also provides exactly the same type of inequality.
You're glorifying your own
demonize
situation, which is success, right? We're talking about an entirely different group of people whose situation isn't successful or isn't even pretty looking at all, right? But the second argument that they tell us is that working class narratives get more airtime and working class people get to access this kind of art. Specifically, what we are arguing against isn't the issue of getting more airtime, but is the issue of what is the content of what you're giving more airtime. That is what's problematic in this debate, and we think that that content of glorifying a struggle is really difficult, right? We don't like the idea of glorifying struggles, because when you're glorifying a struggle, you're saying it's okay to struggle. But more than saying it's okay to struggle, you're saying the best people who you are usually heroes of struggles are the people who struggle and win. We're telling you negate the working class that struggle and doesn't prosper in that regard. We don't see how this helps the working class. But lastly, they tell us that they would rather have this sacrifice glorified than demonized. We think that we would rather have this sacrifice demonized because people are working their sweat off for someone else who doesn't. We think that it's okay for society to demonize this kind of sacrifice because at least you help people to interrogate why they should actually be working so much for someone who doesn't pay them, right? But what does Spear specifically tell you, which is central and important to the working class? He tells you that at the point in which you allow governments to control this narrative, an extension from what our beautiful Orwell tells you, is that you give the government the power to determine who is the working class and who is not. So you give people like Trump to tell America that the working class is straight, white, male people and not even the blacks or not even Mexicans. What you do is you divide the working class along the lines of race, along the lines of tribes, along the lines of sexuality. What you do then that is worse for the working class is that those people have common problems as a collective. When you divide them along those lines, you make it even more difficult for them to collectivize, to actually attack problems that affect all of them. So when you have different classes of working class, you don't give those people a sense of unity, because the power of the working class really isn't in anything else except unity and representation. So when you deal with those things, you don't help the working class. Panel, evaluate this debate on who does the most for the working class. We think that we take that particularly